agents that they're going to have to, zero in on if Plan A and Plan B backfires.
Mark Berman, you wrote one of the few stories that gives the condition for David Lee to return to the New York Knicks, and it's not an official condition, but one nonetheless that regards listening to, looking at, and really thinking about. And that condition is the Knicks really don't think they're going to bring David Lee back unless they can get a center so they can move him to power forward. And Earl Barron is not enough. But when you look at the free agent list, I mean, there's not a lot out there at the center position.
And no question. That's the weakest spot in free agency. And when Canby did his contract extension, that really was a blow to the Knicks. We've mentioned Brad Miller, the Knicks have looked at, Brendan Haywood of the Dallas. I saw him play last night. He's not as active as I remembered. He just had a bad game, but it's kind of bleak. And yeah, the whole thing with Lee is you don't sign him to be your center. I mean, you don't give him $13 million a year to be your center because defensively the Knicks are awful with David Lee as their center. So yeah, they want to bring back David if other pieces fall into place, but they prefer to bring him back as a power forward.
A couple of intriguing names. One is a name that is always out there, but I don't think that Knicks fans necessarily think of him in terms of being a center. They think of him in terms of being a power forward. And I don't know if Chris Bosh would be amenable to playing center. Would it be a situation where, obviously, cap-wise, the Knicks could handle both Bosh and Lee, but is that a reasonable combination to think about going forward?
Well, he's a much better post defender than David, but no, he's not a true center. He has played it off and on with Toronto, but, the Knicks, listen, they might not have any choice. If Bosh is the guy they want to bring in, the guy who wants to come to New York, they're going to have to bring him in, and if he has to play center, so be it. It's not ideal, but this whole strategy is not ideal. I mean, the Knicks will tell you we're right where we want to be, but I don't believe that at all. I don't think they have enough building blocks to draw these free agents, and they're coming off, another horrible season. So, it's going to be a challenge to get the top guys.
Just working again with this David Lee parameter that he stays if they can get a center, a true NBA center. Another name that comes out, and a guy that has some connection to Donnie Walsh, Jermaine O'Neal, not the ideal candidate, but for a short-term stopgap, something like that might help them out.
Yeah, that's not a bad name at all. I don't know if he's going to be that sought after. He didn't have a great season. Obviously, Donnie loves him. He's, again, old, but I think, the Knicks talk about having a long, athletic, good defender alongside David Lee, and Jermaine can pass that test. So that's a pretty good name, and it hasn't been mentioned much at all.
Talking with Mark Berman of the New York Post, Bill Daughtry on 1050 tonight. I had this conversation a little earlier with Al Troutwig about Mike D'Antoni, and I asked him, does D'Antoni get a bad rap, or has he deserved all the criticism that's been sent his way?
Oh, defensively, he deserves every single bit of the criticism. The Knicks, I think they allowed their opponent's field goal shooting percentage was 49%. That's the fourth worst in franchise history. That's just abysmal. They were just a disgrace on defense this season, and that's really what cost them. Mike will, look at the offense, and he'll criticize some things that we didn't move the ball enough, but most Knicks fans will realize that defense cost them the season.
And I think going forward, long term, you've got a few young players there, a handful of young players that you still might need to develop, and you want to develop them as total players. I mean, what's going to be more compelling? I mean, who the Knicks get in free agency, or who Mike D'Antoni is forced to take onto his coaching staff to bring some kind of defensive attitude to this team? Because he went on record with you as talking, we're not even going to have the conversation.
Yeah. I think they exception of a handful of guys who they saw as their keepers.
So this is what we have now coming back. Gallinari and Wilson Chandler, who are two pretty good pieces to build with. Tony Douglas, maybe they re-sign David Lee. From there, we're looking at, okay, let's say all the max guys are off the board. And it's quite possible. You know, there's rumblings of Amari Stoudemire having negotiations on an extension. Dwayne Wade, I think, is a pretty good bet to stay. LeBron James, you know, I've always thought was probably going to end up staying, but we'll see. You know, Bosch is the one most likely to move, but, you know, he could go to Miami. He could go to Chicago. You know, they've got cap space as well. So if the Knicks get shut on the superstars, on the max guys, they're still in a better position than they were because their roster's not locked up with a bunch of overpaid guys who couldn't get them past 33 wins anyway, even when they had a $100 million payroll. So instead what they'll have is room to operate. Now that might mean signing a couple of just good, strong role players and a few minimum guys, and then going into the season still with some of that cap space, waiting for that opportunistic moment where somebody else needs to dump a high contract. And now when you've got cap space, you don't have to match salaries anymore. It makes it a lot easier to make a trade. You can trade into the cap space. You know, worst case scenario, they're rolling over some of that to 2011 when Eddie Curry comes off the cap and they're back in it again trying to make run at Carmelo Anthony. And I know fans don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about any of these options that don't involve LeBron James or Dwayne Wade or Chris Bosh, which is understandable. But I don't think Donnie Walsh and Mike D'Antoni ever went to this thinking it was all or nothing. We got to get these guys. You know, you got to be in it. You know, when you have an opportunity like this, you have to be in the game, especially when you've had so many terrible seasons as they've had. But the great thing about cap space is the flexibility it affords you. They were going nowhere with the roster.
Bring it, Ben, man.
Yo, Bill, I got to say this. I don't know how I feel following Mark Berman and Howard Beck. I think I should be going first. But then again, if you think about it, I should be going last to clean up the mess that those two made.
Now, you heard what they have brought to the table.
Yes.
What? Give me your Nick plan. I mean, Berman says, and he's not saying this definitively, but he basically says, look, especially if you want to keep David Lee, well, you got to get a center so Lee can move to his 4 position. That's the only way Donnie keeps him.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, you know, it sounded like Mark was ready to go on vacation. I don't know about him. I think this is a really busy time of year right now. I mean, there's a lot of people you should be calling.
He's packing it in, man.
Yeah, I mean, just shutting it down already.
Till June 30th. He's packing it in.
You know what? I'll take my vacation in August when all's said and done.
That makes sense.
I don't think this is a good time to take vacation. But I'll answer your question. I actually think, you know, it's really chicken and egg right here. And I think that the big thing is LeBron. And what does he want? The whole idea is, you know, he hasn't signed an extension yet.